in the hopes that it doesn't get canceled or anything, that we have to go back and re-record.
All right, so by the time this episode airs, we are fingers crossed, toes crossed, going to be coming back from our trip on the MSC World America. And we will have video, we will have news, we will have information, but most of all, we are just praying we get on this ship. Is your cruise canceled or extended at the last minute? Well, sometimes Mother Nature puts a damper on cruise plans, and we have the information that you need to know about how to handle it, why this happens, and what to expect. Join us on this latest episode of Wander and Chat. We have just come from a situation where the cruise line canceled our cruise literally days before we were supposed to board the ship. And while that was really bad news for us, it was worse news for the people on the sailing before ours because they were extended by 3 days and their debarkation port changed to a completely different state. Many guests didn't even get the information until they were at the port in Southampton, England, ready to embark on their 7-night transatlantic cruise. We want to talk about why this happened, how it happens, and what you can do or what the cruise lines will do if this happens to you. And Jody, it happened. What happened to us?
So I think the important thing with a cruise to note, especially when it comes to weather-related delays, which is what this was, or weather-related interruptions, is that the cruise line is they're going to be absolutely sure. We both live in the Northeast, and you know what it's like when school's canceled and then you wake up in the morning and you didn't get the snow you thought you were going to get. Things have been canceled. So they really do wait until they know that it's a true situation. In this particular case, this cruise ship, um, and I should note that this was a media sailing that we were going to be on, but it was going to face some weather issues. And so to go around the weather, which is what typically a cruise ship will want to do, they'll want to go around the weather. Um, it left it extended by 2 days. And because of the schedule it was on, it was going to be coming into a different port. And so, some people they found out pretty late in the day. Um, but again, this is a situation where they're leaving and it's like almost a week or a week before this weather situation's happening, which is why, it becomes kind of a last minute thing.
This would be great news, right? I mean, your vacation is extended. You get to stay a couple extra days at sea. It's not costing you any extra money. So how is this not a good thing? How is this not a win-win for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, so it depends really. There's two factors when a cruise is extended. One is that you may have other plans, right? So you may be getting on a plane, or you may have something going on at home, um, where you really can't be away for 2 extra days. Um, the other thing is that the way cruises run, anyone who's taken a cruise knows, like, people are getting off the ship as you're getting on the ship. And so when one cruise is delayed or pushed out 2 days, that's going to affect the cruise behind it. And so that's effectively what happened to us, is that this one cruise was extended for 2 days, and therefore we weren't able to get on it because it was still at sea.
Yeah, and this, it does in theory sound like a great idea, but if you've made a medical appointment or if you have a wedding or a social event coming up that's right at the tail end of your cruise, this could really be devastating news. I mean, it sounds like, oh yeah, 3 more days on the high seas, it's going to be awesome, but it's not always a good situation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when I plan a cruise, I tried to make sure that there isn't anything like super pressing the day or two after. But, that isn't always feasible.
So what happened to these people that were on board this ship or waiting to get on board this ship?
So, obviously we weren't there. So, but we did see some video, and it sounds like some people waited. Um, they had the opportunity to decide to stay on the ship or, you know, bail. But in some cases, some people had checked their luggage already. And so
Mm.
there was, a multi-hour wait for them to get their luggage back and kind of canceled things. It did sound like they got, a full refund and some credit, which is great. Um, but obviously, I mean, everybody who books the cruise wants to sail on the cruise. But of course, safety is also the most important thing.
Yeah, and it is disappointing, but I mean, thank goodness they were able to get full refunds. I mean, this was not anything that anybody could have controlled. So to make matters worse would have been not to get a refund, but they absolutely will get refunded. So that's awesome.
Right, right.
Why do things like this happen? What causes just an entire cruise to cancel?
Yeah, so weather is obviously the biggest factor, and this is especially true in the Caribbean during hurricane season. So, um, these ships, they, like I said, they don't want to cancel. They often can and will go around weather situations. Um, but sometimes the weather isn't in the Caribbean per se. It might be in Florida where the cruise port is. Sometimes the cruise ports are even closed for a day or two. So weather is going to be the biggest factor in this. Um, sometimes there's like a medical emergency where the cruise has to change um, their path. Sometimes there's mechanical situations, but I think when you're talking, especially when you're talking the Caribbean, weather is probably the biggest factor.
Yeah, we've had several delays getting on board a ship because of
Right.
weather. And we've also had a couple of delays where we were supposed to get on the ship at 1 o'clock, but at 10 in the morning, you get a notice from the cruise line that says the ship coming into port is having mechanical issues. So we're going to
Right.
bump you back out to, 5 or 6 this evening. So, I mean, it's not a common occurrence, but there are reasons that it could happen.
Yeah, I've also had it where, and I was on the ship at the time, but it was chosen for like a random check by the Coast Guard. So they spent the morning on the ship, which meant we couldn't disembark. Um, Now, the cruise lines will give you a time that they feel comfortable that you can safely fly. And this fell within that window, although we know a lot of people do push it because typically you can get off pretty quickly. In this case, we did not get off quickly. We were in a huge line waiting to get off the ship, but that meant everything got pushed back, which means the people embarking the ship probably had to embark later in the day.
Yeah, I'm too nervous for those early morning flights on cruise
Yeah,
days.
I can't do, I mean, having done that where we stood in line, like literally we were on the Disney Dream and we were in a line that curved from the door all the way around past the theaters and all the way back, completely frozen waiting.
Yeah, it's it makes me too nervous.
Um,
It really does. What can people do if this happens at you're on the ship and this happens to you, or you're hoping to get on the ship and this happens to you? What are your options?
so, first and foremost, it's important to be prepared for the situation. And sometimes you can be more prepared if you know that the weather is coming. So, especially when it comes to hurricane season, you typically do get a heads up that there's some sort of disturbance. Now, we know there'll be a lot of those, and, a lot of them don't come to any sort of disturbance on the cruise. But, first of all, like I mentioned, giving yourself some cushion. Don't be the first flight out for the day. Don't, you know, come back on a Friday and have, a big family wedding the Saturday. Um, being prepared. Um, Tickets, flight tickets, for a while they were refundable because of the pandemic. Some of that's changing. You know, if there is a weather situation at, at the port where your airport is, your airline will likely be flexible and offer no change fees. But if the weather's happening elsewhere and you're delayed, you might be out of luck. So, where you can have refundable, um, that's always a good option. But, I understand that it's expensive. Um, Travel insurance can be, a huge benefit because they will cover, depending on the policy you buy, it'll cover a travel interruption. So any of these costs will be covered. Now, like you mentioned, if you're on a cruise ship for extra days, you don't have to pay for that.
Right.
Uh, the cruise will cover that. But, any of the flight changes you have to make, or, if you do have to end up staying in a hotel an extra night because maybe you can't get the flight out, um, the travel insurance can cover that. And then, just avoid kind of the non-refundable hotels and things after your cruise, especially because you know that's it's going to be completely out of your control.
Yeah, and those non-refundable hotel fares are popping up more and more often, and they're super tempting because you can really save some decent money, but if you've got a hotel booked on one end at the end of your cruise and you can't get there for 2 or 3 days, it doesn't matter that you've saved a ton of money because now you've lost all of the money.
Yeah, and also, I recommend whenever you cruise to have the phone numbers and just, um, booking information of your flight and any hotels you might have afterwards, like saved in your phone, so you're not using, necessarily having to use Wi-Fi to get through to it. Um, and that kind of segues into our experience when we were delayed on a cruise. Um,
Mhm.
and so, um, we were on, was it 2023 maybe?
I think so.
We were on the Disney Wish. First time on the Disney Wish. That was the year that the ship um, was introduced, and we we had planned 2 days at Disney World before we got on the ship.
Right.
So when I was leaving Boston, I was starting to hear a little bit of rumble about potentially a disturbance in the Caribbean, but it wasn't really a thing yet. But by the time we got on the ship, we were getting a little concerned, right?
Yeah.
um, and so initially, we were told everything was status quo, get on the ship. Um, I will say, I think all of us, there were six of us on the sailing together. We were all super prepared, and I think, prepared ourselves the best we possibly could.
Yeah.
We all knew that this was a possibility. So even when there was some talk of a disturbance, I had packed extra medication for a couple of days. Um, I wanted, so I ended up doing laundry on the ship. I didn't pack extra clothes. Um, but I did have like extra contact lenses and stuff like that. So that I always recommend. Um, we were on the ship, I want to say, for a few hours when the captain came on and said we would be arriving at the port late, right?
Yeah.
The first day we would be arriving, or the day, so it would be the same um, disembarkment, but a later time. We had not left the port yet, so we were all able to get on the network and move our flights. Um, then we went to Nassau and it poured. And I believe it was at Nassau where they told us we were going to be delayed another 2 days.
Yeah.
So at that point, we knew instead of a 4-day trip, it would be a 6-day trip. So we all made our phone calls again, and we were all able to get out on the day, the new day.
Yeah.
But the reason why we were delayed, other than, the disturbance, was the fact that the Port Canaveral was going to be closed.
Yeah, so that was something not in anybody's control. I mean, the ship couldn't do anything about it, and it definitely does give you a reminder, make sure you do have a couple of extra days of medication. The laundry facilities on board, like Disney is one of those cruise lines that has a laundry room that you
Right.
can go to. But if you're now having to send your laundry out along with hundreds of other
Right.
people, you may not get it back in time, so pack a couple extra things. But
Right.
it was both scary and exciting.
Yeah, it was. So we like I said, we were at Nassau for the day. It was delayed. Um, I believe we were scheduled to go to Castaway Key the next day. And as much as our captain tried to dock at Castaway Key, he could not. Um, and it was a washout. Like
Yeah.
not like a little bit of rain. Like I think had he been successful docking, nobody would have wanted to get off that ship.
Yeah, no.
Um, and that's another thing too is that even if even if your cruise is not delayed, there are times where your itinerary will change. You can't make it to a certain, and this happens a lot, especially with tender ports. But
Mhm.
you may not be able to make it into port. Sometimes the cruise line will be able to reroute and get you somewhere else. I've heard from captains that that can be challenging because everybody's trying to do that. And then it becomes kind of a negotiation as to who actually gets the spots, like which cruise line, which ship. Um, so this is maybe a little off of the topic specifically, but this kind of gets to excursions where you don't want to necessarily be committed to an excursion that is non-refundable.
Yeah. The other thing to note about Disney, and I can't say this for every cruise line because this was our one and only experience with something
Right.
big like this, but Disney made internet access available
Right.
in some capacity for everybody on board the ship. So you could make alternate arrangements or reach out to your family at home and let them know that you weren't going to be coming back in time. So I think that's, you know, we always buy the Wi-Fi because we do have stuff going on at home, but I
Right.
think that was important to know, at least to calm some fears, like I'm going to miss my flight and nobody's going to
Right.
know. And but they
They
did
also
make it an option for you to,
They also made phones available at guest services. They had brought out like a row of phones, um, and people were not only were they calling, but then when they were finished, they were like holding up the phone and saying like, "I've got Walt Disney World on the line," so people didn't
yeah,
have to like wait on hold, which was great. Probably completely messed up all those people's like phone processes, but
yeah,
um, yeah, so we were obviously able to communicate with home, and we were, it was um six of us were on the cruise ship together. We didn't have our families with us, so obviously communicating with families is important. Um we so, Disney obviously they did do everything they could to make this exciting. They um put out a schedule of events for those 2 days. They brought it was like a pilot for a game show that they hadn't quite um premiered kind of as like a little special thing. They got permission to show a movie that had come out like while we were at sea. Um,
Hocus Pocus 2. I was so excited.
oh, that's right. That's right. They did like towel folding, which they normally don't do on the Caribbean. They reset our dining rotation, so it
Yeah,
was the same menus, but we just started at the beginning again. Um, Obviously, same stateroom, all of that. Um, the negative is that and he tried his hardest to get us into good weather, and I will say he didn't necessarily get us into good weather, but we were away from the bad weather.
yeah, yeah.
um
We were away from the worst of it.
so it wasn't like an uncomfortable sailing at all. um it wasn't rocky or anything like that. It wasn't super sunny,
Yeah.
um but it was fun. um but it was an experience.
It was an experience, and I don't think if we hadn't had that experience, I don't know that I would be as prepared on vacations now,
Right.
because I remember some of the stuff back then that I wish I had done or I
Yeah.
had brought with me, and
Yeah.
now I know what to do and how to be ready.
Yeah, definitely. And I think back then too, it was still when the flights were more refundable. So some of us had like booked, backup flights that we were able to cancel, which isn't necessarily going to be the case now.
Yeah.
But, um, but yeah, we definitely are all more prepared. And I've gone on sailing since then where I've seen that there could be a disturbance, and I've definitely packed a little bit of extra. Um, But yeah, it's something you have to be prepared for,
Yeah,
especially during hurricane season.
absolutely. If this is a situation that you've ever found yourself in, please let us know in the comments. We would love to know how you handled it, how you dealt with it. Were you disappointed? Were you excited to get extra time on the ship? Or has this happened on any vacation? Just let us know in the comments because we'd love to chat about it. We've had a couple of questions come in from previous episodes. Jody, you talked a lot about all inclusive resorts, but are there any in the United States?
Yeah, so a lot of people ask this, and there aren't. So, we talked a lot about the all-inclusive resorts that are like beach resorts. Um, there aren't many or even any of that type of, I'm not aware of any in the US that are like the ones in the Caribbean. Um, but there are other things that are all inclusive or somewhat all inclusive. Um, these include things like dude ranches in the West. Um, and then there's like what I call summer camp style resorts. So, one example that I've stayed at is My Just Lodge, which is up in Sebago Lake, Maine. And this is, you stay in a cabin. Um, they have like lake activities, they have like a fun little kids club. Uh, you eat lunch is something, it isn't like there's 10 restaurants to choose from. There is like one event that happens for lunch. It can be a beach barbecue, it can be, um, a buffet, or there's like a lobster bake they do one day a week. Everybody kind of comes together and does that. And then dinner is you get a reservation, but it's like kind of an upscale dinner. The kids eat on the back deck of the restaurant with like the whole kids club. So there are places like that, but not necessarily the all inclusive resort that we were talking about in our episode.
I don't mind the summer camp thing, and I think for a lot of people that harkens back to their childhood and great memories, and it would be
Yeah,
kind of fun to do.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed that. So on the room location episode, um, someone asked, "What happens if we get to the room and we don't like the location?" So you get there and you realize, the ice machine's right outside or something else. Is there anything that can be done at that point?
I won't say no, but what I will say is that there's not as much flexibility once you're already there. And some resorts, they're full. They're booked to capacity. They may not have an opportunity to move you to a different location. It won't hurt to go back to the front desk and ask them, but your best chance at getting the room location that you want is if you request it ahead of time. The
Right,
other thing I will say is if you're on a cruise ship and you've done like a guarantee room and you get to the room and you find out this is not acceptable at all, you're really kind of out of luck at that point
right,
because once you've committed to I'll just take any room that you give me because I'm going to save a couple of $100, you're going to get the rooms that haven't been booked by other guests.
right,
And at that point, also, again, if the ship is full, there's really not any flexibility to move you. So it's
right.
always better to book the room you want before you go. In our news segment this week, there's this is something on my bucket list. Let's talk Drake Passage and what goes on. Now, I've heard it referred to the Drake Lake because sometimes you can go there and it's just smooth sailing and it's calm. That hasn't been everybody's experience.
Right. So the Drake Passage is kind of a, you know, you have to go through it to get to Antarctica. So if you're sailing to Antarctica, um, it's, go on TikTok or Instagram and search it. You will find some crazy videos of
Yeah.
this passage. This is, you know, not what we mentioned about our sailing during the hurricane being nice and smooth. This is not smooth. But the reason why we're talking about it specifically is that there was um, kind of a somewhat recent cruise where, you know, they called it the 48-hour roller coaster. Um, it was like 35-foot waves. Um, and so, knowing that this is a possibility, would you do it?
I have an irrational fear of rogue waves. If you don't know what a rogue wave is, you've got to Google that and go on YouTube for that. But even with that in the back of my head, I think just the experience of doing it and coming through the other side and just being like, yeah, I did it. Like I
Yeah.
survived. I would totally do it.
Yeah, I would do it too. I think I would be, and I'm not prone to seasickness on cruise ships, but I would be fully prepared to be sick on a cruise ship. Um, but yeah, I would still do it, I think. But I think anyone who does plan this type of trip, and obviously this is a massive bucket list type trip. I mean, this is like
Yeah.
the top of the bucket list. Um, you gotta look at the videos and be mentally prepared for it because it's something.
Yeah, and I can't imagine there's anybody that books this kind of a trip to Antarctica without some
Yeah,
knowledge
yeah,
that this is going to be a possibility. But I watch these videos of people doing this Drake Passage crossing, and I'm like, these are the bravest souls ever to sail on cruise ships because it's crazy, but I would totally do it.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's Wander and Chat. Please join us next week. We are so excited to bring you everything MSC World America from our media sailing. We are so excited to tell you all about the ship, what we've experienced, and just join us either on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, or anywhere where you get your podcasts. And be sure to subscribe.